Hello and welcome to my next tutorial, and today we are talking about anisotropy. I know anisotropy can be quite weird, and I think that's why it's probably helpful to make a little tutorial about it to show you that it's actually more easy to use as you might think. So what the hell is anisotropy? You can imagine, or you can see anisotropy as a bunch of very tiny scratches that are going all into a certain direction. So they can be all parallel going, for example, on a horizontal way, or they can also be in a round circular shape, but they are somewhat parallel to each other, what makes stretch the specular highlight into a certain direction. And what I actually mean by that is we can crank up here quickly the values, and then we can see we get here this specular highlight that is getting stretched vertically. So here is this hot specular highlight, and then we get it stretched into a certain direction, and then when we rotate we see actually the highlight gets rotated as well. So we can really imagine as really tiny scratches that are going into a certain direction, and this is basically the whole fundamental thing of anisotropy. So it's more of a guiding of the specular highlight into certain direction. We mostly see this effect on metals and also on plastic, but it can also be on some for example, when you have a very glossy looking surface like a car, and then over the age it kind of gets also some sort of direction on the specular when it gets more and more micro scratches that are going into a certain direction. So yeah, but I would say in most of the cases it is most noticeable on the metals and on the plastics, and this is also where we are going to use it the most often. So let's have a look on what values we have here. So actually RenderMan also has negative anisotropy, which I'm very honest with you, I've never used before, and it has something to do with the tangent normals, and then it stretches them negatively, but in fact I've never used it, so let's probably just stick to a more practical way here in this video. So the anisotropy we see will act as a strength. So how much of this effect do we want? Like, one will be super strong, it will look super funky, not realistic at all. So in my experience, a bit less is more. But let's crank it up a bit for the tutorial that we actually can see what is happening. So then we also have the rotation, which I think is quite self-explanatory, but we can guide the rotation of these micro scratches we have on a surface based on this value. And we can go 360 degrees. And for example, here 0 is the exact same as 0.5, so it's kind of like just 180 degrees, while then 1 is 360, so it's the same again. So we can actually take use of that to make our materials look more complex. So I'm very sure you all know when you have a cooking pan, and on the bottom side you have this circular pattern of this micro scratches kind of. This is, for example, a use case where we can create such a radial direction mask or direction map for the rotation. But we can also use some scratches. So for example, here I'm using, I think it is, which one is it? Let me see, it's from Sackboxel. He has actually a pretty cool texture pack, which I can highly recommend. Probably it is like that. Oh, come on, open. Ah, now it's open. Yeah, it's quite big. So I don't think it's exactly that. It's probably that one. Yeah, I think it's that one. So this is just a black and white mask, and we have two ways of how we can actually now take use of that. So we can either use it as a mask, kind of how strong we want to have the effect. Now we pipe it into the anisotropy. So now we have kind of like an on-off situation where we say, okay, wherever it is white, there we have the 100% effect of this anisotropy, and wherever it's black, there we keep it normal. This will give us the freedom to change the rotation the way how we want it. This can be helpful in some situations. So this really depends on your use case. So what do you want? You can also kind of alter both if you want. Sometimes you maybe want to have an isolation mask for an area and then guide there the anisotropy with such a scratch mask or whatever. So you can absolutely use both. But we can also use the rotation. So now we can say, okay, how much of this effect do we want? So let's go nuts, and then we will get a very strong effect, which again is not going to look very realistic. So less is more. Let's probably go for 2.5, that we can actually see it here in the tutorial a bit more. But now we have no control over the direction anymore, technically. But practically, we can also use then a spline or a ramp or a remap node to remap the values. So we can juggle around these values the way how we want. So now we can bring down, for example, the white a bit, and we see actually it changes our look here. There we go. Now it goes a bit less. So we can see we get now a bit more of a directionality here by catching the highlight. So the same exact thing can also work for the weight or for the strength. So anisotropy in here, and then we can see we can just alter the look with that. So while one, of course, is, hey, let's go all the way, and then let's bring it down to a more moderate value, and then it's probably a bit more realistic. So by just looking at that, you maybe would say, hey, but this looks exactly like roughness. But technically, it is actually altering the roughness. That's actually true. But it's not just pure roughness. It's really guiding the highlight of the specular, or guiding the specular highlight into a certain direction. And what I mean with that is I can actually show you that. So let's get another spline here. And we pipe this guy into our roughness. Let's grade it to a value where we say, okay, this is probably what we are looking for. So not too crazy, maybe something like, we have to bring down here real quick that as well, so that we get 0 of that. So let's give this a bit boost again. So we see we get now quite nice roughness breakups here in our surface. Let's get a snapshot that we can actually review that. Here we go. And now let's say we want to have also a bit the rotation. So let's get here the result F for the float, and we put it here into the rotation. I think this one was actually looking pretty cool. So, and now we crank this guy up a bit as well. So we see some subtle changes are happening here. So maybe let's make 1.5. And then we can get a snapshot of that as well. And then for comparison, we can also just view the anisotropy effect. So let's get rid of that. Let's resolve it here a tiny bit or render it, and then we can take a snapshot as well. And then we can compare the different effects. So get the snapshot. Then let's wait until it's loading here. It's actually interesting that it's so slow to take a snapshot. Let's pause. And then I have here the window already. So here we go. So if I remember right, here's only roughness. Here we have with anisotropy together, where we guide a bit the highlight. And here is only anisotropy. And when we compare, this looks different. So it's not just roughness. And this is actually how we can just give our material just a bit of a boost in terms of complexity or behavior of the specular. And a neat little trick is when you have a surface that actually looks already pretty cool with only roughness, and you have a cool roughness map, you can use the roughness map, grade it to more moderate values here with our spline node or ramp or range node. Also keep in mind, maybe you want to alter the black point as well, and we grade it to a value that is not crazy contrasty. So it gets some values, but it's not incredible contrasty. And then we can feed that into the anisotropy rotation or anisotropy strength, whatever you want. And then we can just get a tiny bit more complexity on top of our already cool looking metal or plastic material. So this is really basically it, and I really hope that this helps you to understand the concept of anisotropy a bit better, and we can really see it's quite straightforward, I think. So we just keep in mind we mimic directed micro scratches that are going into a certain direction. They can be straight or they can be round, they can also be swirled, whatever, and that we can take to our advantage to make our materials look a bit more complex. So yeah, I hope this was helpful for you and that you learned something, and I hope to see you guys in the next tutorial. See you then, bye bye.